Hi, I'm Melissa Chen. 3 months ago, I walked into our living room after my final music theory exam and found only the faint rectangular outline on our faded carpet where my baby grand piano had stood since I was 8 years old. That hollow space felt like someone had punched a hole straight through my chest. The piano, the one my grandfather had refinished by hand over countless weekends, the one I'd played for hours every day since elementary school, had vanished as if it had never been part of our home. Mom was in the kitchen stirring pasta sauce when she glanced over her shoulder and said, "We needed to clear some space. And honestly, sweetie, Amber's prom is coming up." They'd sold my $12,000 Yamaha Baby Grand for my sister's single night of high school glory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The April afternoon stretched long shadows across our suburban Boston neighborhood when I came home that day. Dogwood trees had just begun to bloom along our street, their white petals catching the golden spring light. I remember noticing how beautiful they looked and feeling a fleeting moment of peace before I stepped through our front door. I'd been at the university since early morning, first for my music theory final, then practicing in their rehearsal rooms until my fingers ached in that satisfying way that told me I'd put in good work. My backpack was heavy with sheet music, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, which I'd been working on for nearly 8 months. Professor Abernathy had finally nodded during my run-through yesterday, the closest he ever came to expressing approval. "You're beginning to understand it," he'd said, which from him felt like effusive praise. I couldn't wait to refine the third movement on my own piano, where I knew every subtle nuance of the keys, every slight resistance that had become as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I pushed open our front door, the faint scent of Mom's marinara sauce greeting me. Something felt immediately wrong, though I couldn't place it at first. Our house had the same framed family photos lining the entryway, the same slightly scuffed hardwood floors leading to the living room. But something fundamental had shifted in the energy of our home. I dropped my backpack by the door and walked around the corner into the living room. And then I saw it. Or rather, I saw the absence of it. The vast empty space where my piano had stood for nearly a decade. Just the faint imprints on the carpet remained, 4 small depressions where its legs had faithfully held up the instrument that had shaped my entire identity. I stood frozen, my brain struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. Perhaps they'd moved it? A ridiculous thought. The baby grand weighed over 600 pounds and required professional movers. Still, I found myself walking through the house, checking the dining room, the basement, as if a grand piano could somehow be tucked away in a corner I'd overlooked. When I returned to the kitchen, Mom was humming to herself, stirring her sauce, with the wooden spoon my father had carved years ago. She wore her gardening clothes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, completely at ease while my world collapsed around me. "Mom," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Where's my piano?" She turned, her expression betraying just the briefest flicker of discomfort before settling back into casual nonchalance. "Oh, we sold it yesterday. Johnson's Music. Gave us a decent price considering its age." The words hit me like individual blows. Sold. Yesterday. Decent price. Considering its age. "You sold my piano?" I repeated, certain I must have misunderstood something fundamental about this conversation. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, avoiding my eyes. "We've been talking about this for months, Mel. You're barely home these days with all your university classes, and that thing took up half the living room." "That thing?" I echoed, feeling my chest constrict. "That thing was my piano. Grandpa restored it for me." "Your grandfather would understand practical decisions," she said, turning back to her sauce. "Besides, Amber needs a proper prom dress. You know, all her friends are wearing those designer gowns this year. The Simpson girl got hers from New York." I struggled to draw a full breath. "You sold my piano for Amber's prom dress?" my mother sighed, finally setting down her spoon to face me. Not just that. We're redoing the living room to open up the space. And with college tuition coming up for you, we need to be practical. It's just a piano, Melissa. There are plenty at school you can use. Just a piano. As if she'd sold an old couch or an outdated television. Not the instrument I'd spent thousands of hours playing, the one that held my tears, my laughter, my frustrations and triumphs. Not the last gift from my grandfather before cancer took him when I was 12. "Where's Dad?" I asked, needing to hear his version, clinging to the desperate hope that Mom had somehow acted alone. "Working late. He helped arrange the sale with his golf buddy from Johnson's." Her tone carried finality, like we were discussing a minor change in dinner plans rather than the removal of my emotional anchor. I stood in silence, the magnitude of what had happened still washing over me in painful waves. My sheet music felt suddenly heavy in my backpack, orphaned notes with no keys to bring them to life. "Dinner's in an hour," Mom added, clearly considering the conversation finished. I turned and walked numbly to my bedroom, closing the door, quietly behind me. No dramatic slam, no shouting. Sometimes betrayal is too profound for theatrics. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands, pianist's hands with long fingers and carefully maintained nails, resting uselessly in my lap. On my desk sat trophies from piano competitions dating back to 4th grade, certificates in frames, a photograph of Grandpa and me at my first serious recital when I was 10, his weathered carpenter's hands resting proudly on my shoulders. He'd worked every weekend for 7 months to restore that piano, when we found it neglected in the basement of our church. "This one has soul," he told me, showing me how to recognize the quality of its soundboard, the responsiveness of its action. "Take care of it, and it will tell your stories when words fail." Now it was gone, sold to fund Amber's single night of high school pageantry and my mother's home renovation dreams. I pulled out my phone and opened our family group chat. The most recent message was from yesterday, a photo Amber had sent of a champagne-colored gown with delicate beadwork across the bodice. "The dress," she'd captioned it, followed by heart-eye emojis. Mom had responded, "Perfect, picking it up tomorrow." Tomorrow had been today. While I'd been pouring my heart into Rachmaninoff's emotional landscapes, they'd been liquidating, the very instrument that made such expression possible. I switched to my text thread with Dad. "You sold my piano without telling me?" I wrote, then deleted it. "How could you do this?" Delete. "Did Grandpa's gift mean nothing to you?" Delete. Finally, I simply wrote, "Why?" The message showed as delivered, then read. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. After several minutes, his response came through. "We'll talk when I get home. This was a family decision." Family decision. Except I was family, and no one had consulted me. I lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars had been arranged in accurate constellations by my father when I was 7. Back when he still looked at me with the same pride he now reserved exclusively for Amber. Back when my musical talent was considered special rather than inconvenient. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The shift had been gradual. When my sister entered high school and blossomed into the social butterfly I'd never been, my parents' attention realigned. Amber's cheerleading competitions and prom queen nominations generated immediate, visible pride. My hours at the piano, my steadily advancing technical skills, my growing repertoire, these became background noise in our household narrative. "That's nice, honey," they'd say absently when I mentioned a new piece I'd mastered, their eyes already drifting toward their phones to check if Amber had posted new photos from whatever social event occupied her weekend. I plugged my earbuds in and pulled up a recording from last year's winter showcase. My interpretation of Debussy's Clair de Lune. The familiar opening notes washed over me, and I closed my eyes, my fingers automatically moving in phantom keystrokes above my stomach. Muscle memory for an instrument that was no longer mine. Halfway through the piece, my bedroom door opened. Amber stood in the doorway, her perfect blonde hair freshly highlighted, wearing our high school's cheerleading uniform. I pulled out one earbud. "Ever heard of knocking?" She ignored my question, leaning against the doorframe. "Mom said you're upset about the piano." Something in her casual tone made me sit up. "Did you know they were selling it?" She shrugged, examining her manicured nails. "They mentioned it a few weeks ago. I figured you knew." "And you didn't think to tell me?" "That piano was from Grandpa. He gave me stuff too, you know. Those pearl earrings I never wear." She stepped into my room uninvited, glancing around with the mild curiosity of someone touring a moderately interesting museum exhibit. "Anyway, it's not like you can take it to college. And my prom is in 3 weeks. I can't go in something off the rack." The casual cruelty of her equivalence, my piano versus her one-night dress, left me momentarily speechless. "Jessica Porter is wearing Marchesa," she continued, oblivious to or simply unconcerned with my distress. "And Tyler might be asking me to go with him. Can you imagine if I showed up looking basic?" I stared at my sister, trying to recognize the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who once drew a crayon picture of me, playing at Carnegie Hall. When had she transformed into this stranger who could witness my pain without the slightest flicker of empathy? "Get out of my room," I said quietly. She rolled her eyes. "God, you're so dramatic. It's just a piano. Play one at school." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, Mom wants you to come help with dinner. Something about setting the table." After she left, I remained sitting on my bed, the Debussy still playing in one ear. The music that had once given me solace now felt like it was emanating from another world entirely. A world where beautiful things were valued, where art and expression mattered more than designer labels and social status. I should have been practicing. The university's prestigious Whitmore competition was in 6 weeks. First prize was $5,000 and a solo performance with the Boston Philharmonic. I'd been working toward it since freshman year, each year advancing further but never quite claiming the top spot. This year, my senior year, was my final chance. But my piano was gone. The instrument whose touch I knew intimately, whose slight resistance on the B-flat key I'd adjusted for, whose pedal action I could anticipate like my own heartbeat. Gone. I picked up my phone again and texted Professor Abernathy. "Family sold my piano without warning. Need extended practice room access for Whitmore Prep." His response came quickly. "Studio available 5:09 a.m. and 8:11 p.m. Key under mat tomorrow. This changes nothing about expectations." That was Abernathy. No sympathy, just solutions and unwavering standards. In that moment, I appreciated his matter-of-fact response more than any condolences. I set my alarm for 4:15 a.m. The university was a 30-minute bus ride away. If I could get there by 5, I'd have 4 hours of practice before my music history class. Then more practice during lunch between classes and into the evening. It would be exhausting, but necessary. When I finally went downstairs for dinner, Dad had arrived home. He sat at the head of the table, already serving himself lasagna. Mom placed a basket of garlic bread in the center, while Amber texted rapidly, on her phone, barely acknowledging the food in front of her, an ordinary family dinner scene, except for the massive betrayal hanging in the air between us. I took my seat silently, avoiding eye contact with either parent. "How was your exam?" Dad asked, his voice forcefully casual. "Fine," I replied, moving lasagna around my plate without eating. Professor Liu said my analysis of Beethoven's innovative harmonic structures showed genuine insight. "That's nice," Mom said automatically, the same response she'd give if I'd reported the cafeteria had served decent mac and cheese. "Melissa," Dad began, setting down his fork. "About the piano." "Let's not discuss it at dinner," Mom interrupted. "Amber, tell Dad about Tyler's proposal plan." And just like that, the conversation shifted to the elaborate way Amber's prospective date planned to ask her to prom, involving the entire cheer squad and some complex arrangement with rose petals. On the football field, I stared at my plate, invisible again. The familiar knot of recognition formed in my stomach, the understanding that in our family narrative, my sister's social achievements would always eclipse my musical ones. Her temporary teenage glories were celebrated while my years of disciplined study were treated as an eccentric hobby. After dinner, I helped clear the dishes mechanically. As I loaded the dishwasher, Dad approached, leaning against the counter beside me. "I know you're upset," he said quietly. I continued rinsing plates, not trusting myself to respond. "The piano was taking up space we needed," he continued. "And with college expenses coming up, practical decisions have to be made." I finally looked at him. Practical decisions like spending thousands on Amber's prom dress? He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "That's different." "How?" "Explain to me how that's different." Prom is a once-in-a-lifetime experience for her. It's important. And my music isn't important? The piano Grandpa restored for me wasn't important? Dad's expression hardened slightly. "Your grandfather would understand financial priorities. And you have the university's facilities. You're hardly deprived." "You didn't even ask me," I said, my voice finally breaking. "You just decided my piano didn't matter." "It was a family decision," he repeated his text message. "I'm family too," I whispered. He patted my shoulder awkwardly. "You'll understand when you're older, when you have to balance everyone's needs. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made." Except it wasn't everyone making sacrifices, just me. Later, that night I sat at my desk with my headphones on, playing scales and arpeggios on a silent MIDI keyboard connected to my laptop. It was a poor substitute. No dynamic response, no pedal, no resistance from real hammers striking strings. But it was all I had now. The notes glowed on my computer screen as I ran through fingering exercises, my muscles trying to maintain the memory of movements that had become as natural as breathing. Tomorrow I would wake before dawn, catch the first bus to campus, and begin rebuilding my relationship with the practice room's Yamaha upright. A decent instrument, but not my instrument. Not the one that knew my touch, my tendencies, my heart. As midnight approached, my phone lit up with a text from Amber. "Need to borrow your pearl earrings for prom, the ones from Grandpa." I stared at the message, a cold clarity washing over me. They hadn't just taken my piano. They were systematically erasing any special connection I had to our grandfather, redistributing his legacy as if my relationship with him had been incidental rather than foundational. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Whitmore competition guidelines. First prize, $5,000 and a solo performance with the Boston Philharmonic at Symphony Hall. The preliminary round required a Bach prelude and fugue, plus a classical-era sonata movement. Finals added a major romantic concerto movement with piano accompaniment. My repertoire was set. Bach's Prelude and Fugue in a minor from the Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1, the first movement of Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata, and the first movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, challenging pieces that showcased technical precision, emotional depth, and artistic maturity. I closed my eyes, visualizing the music, hearing it in my mind while my fingers moved, in silent choreography above the desk. This competition had just transformed from an important milestone to an absolute necessity. I needed to win, not just for the recognition or the performance opportunity, but for the prize money that would let me start rebuilding what I'd lost. The next morning, I slipped out of the house at 4:30 a.m. while everyone else slept. The early spring air carried a damp chill as I walked to the bus stop, my backpack heavy with scores and music theory textbooks. The city was still dark, streetlights casting pools of yellow on empty sidewalks. Professor Abernathy's studio was on the third floor of the music building, a corner room with 2 pianos, a Steinway Grand for performance, and a Yamaha upright for teaching. As promised, a key waited under the doormat. I let myself in, turning, on only the small desk lamp to avoid drawing attention from security. The Steinway gleamed in the dim light, its polished ebony surface both welcoming and intimidating. I set my backpack down and approached it reverently, running my fingertips lightly across the fallboard before lifting it to reveal the keys. This instrument was superior to my now-sold Yamaha in every technical aspect. A concert grand with immaculate action and resonant bass. But it wasn't mine. It didn't hold the memories of my 10-year-old hands stretching to reach octaves, my teenage tears falling on the keys during the months after Grandpa died, my jubilation when I mastered Chopin's revolutionary etude after 6 months of work. Still, it was a magnificent piano, and for the next 4 hours, it would be my sanctuary. I began with scales and arpeggios, reintroducing my hands to the weight of real keys after last night's silent practice. Then Bach, the intricate counterpoint of the fugue requiring absolute precision and clarity. The Beethoven followed, its demanding octave passages and rapid hand crossing making my shoulders tense until I consciously relaxed them. Finally, Rachmaninoff, the piece that had been my focus for nearly a year. The concerto's opening chords resonated through the empty studio, dark and powerful. As I played, something shifted inside me. The music transformed from notes on a page to raw emotion pouring through my fingers. Anger, betrayal, determination, all channeled into Rachmaninoff's sweeping phrases and complex harmonies. I lost track of time, repeating difficult passages, refining transitions, exploring dynamic contrasts. When I finally paused, sunlight was streaming through the windows and my watch showed 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes until my first class. As I gathered my scores, the door opened. Professor Abernathy stood there, his perpetually stern expression unchanged despite the early hour. "Your Bach needs work," he said without preamble. "The fugue subject lacks definition in the recapitulation." I nodded, unsurprised by his direct criticism. "I'll focus on that tomorrow." He entered the room fully, closing the door behind him. "Your family sold your instrument." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes, without telling me. For my sister's prom dress and living room renovations." He made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a grunt. "Philistines." Coming from Abernathy, this was practically a declaration of solidarity. He walked to the Steinway, examining it as if checking for damage after my practice session. "The Whitmore is in 6 weeks," he said. "You'll need more than early mornings and late nights." "I know. I'm working on a solution." He nodded once briskly. "The faculty recital is Friday evening. I'm playing Liszt and Prokofiev. My studio will be empty from 5 until 7 while I prepare in the green room." This was his way of offering additional practice time, not through obvious kindness, but through information that I could use. "Thank you, Professor." He adjusted, his wire-rimmed glasses. "Your Rachmaninoff shows promise. Don't let domestic distractions compromise your preparation." With that, he left, the door closing firmly behind him. I smiled slightly at his characteristic bluntness. In the world of classical music education, Abernathy was known as a brilliant pianist and a merciless teacher who accepted only the most dedicated students. His backhanded assistance meant he believed I had a chance at winning the Whitmore. Maybe I did. Maybe this loss, this betrayal, could fuel something greater than resentment. Maybe just maybe, it could propel me toward the future I'd been working toward since I was 8 years old, when Grandpa first showed me how to feel the music beyond just playing the notes. With renewed determination, I headed to class, already, planning my practice schedule for the coming weeks. My family might have sold my piano, but they couldn't sell my talent, my training, or my resolve. Those remained mine, and I was about to show them, and everyone else, exactly what they were worth. The Whitmore competition preliminaries were 3 weeks away, and my new routine had quickly become both exhausting and necessary. Each morning began in darkness, my alarm jolting me awake at 4:15 a.m. I'd dress silently, grab my music bag, and slip out of the house before anyone else stirred. The early bus to campus was nearly empty, just a handful of night shift workers heading home, and a few dedicated gym-goers clutching travel mugs of coffee. By 5 a.m., I'd unlock Professor Abernathy's studio and begin my daily resurrection at the Steinway. The first hour always felt like relearning my own body, fingers stiff from sleep, mind foggy until the music gradually brought both to clarity. Bach first? Always Bach. The mathematical precision of his counterpoint demanded complete focus, leaving no room for anger or self-pity. Then Beethoven, his revolutionary energy matching my growing determination. Finally, Rachmaninoff, where I could pour all my complicated emotions into those magnificent Russian melodies. After 4 hours of practice, I'd attend classes, fitting, in additional practice sessions during lunch breaks and between lectures, then evening rehearsals for university ensembles, followed by more solo practice until the security guard's 11 p.m. reminder that even dedicated music students needed to sleep occasionally. I'd catch the last bus home, often the only passenger, and slip back into the house long after everyone had gone to bed. The empty space in the living room seemed to mock me each night as I passed it, a void that reminded me of everything that had been taken. My parents barely noticed my absence. At the rare family dinners I attended, conversations centered around Amber's prom preparations, her shoes, her hair appointment, her after-party plans. My father would occasionally ask about my piano stuff, as he called it, but his interest evaporated the moment I offered any substantive response about repertoire or technique. "You're pushing yourself too hard," my mother remarked one evening, noticing the dark circles under my eyes. "All this for a competition? It's not healthy, Melissa." The irony of her concern after removing my primary emotional outlet wasn't lost on me, but I simply nodded and continued eating. Words wouldn't change anything, only results would. Professor Abernathy had become my unexpected ally. He never mentioned my family situation again after that first morning, but he began leaving detailed technical notes on my scores during my pre-dawn practice sessions. He'd arrive later to find the studio empty, my presence only evident in the day, slightly adjusted piano bench and the coffee cup in the trash. His notes were never encouraging. Beethoven development section lacks architectural awareness, or pedaling in Rachmaninoff obscures harmonic progression. But they gave me specific problems to solve, concrete ways to channel my determination. 2 weeks before preliminaries, I arrived for my scheduled lesson to find him playing through the cadenza of my Rachmaninoff concerto. He stopped when I entered but didn't turn around. "Your interpretation is becoming interesting," he said, still facing the piano. Coming from Abernathy, this was extraordinary praise. "Thank you, Professor." The competition jury includes Levinson from Juilliard and Santiago from Curtis. He finally turned to face me. "Both appreciate technical precision, but they reward emotional authenticity. Your recent practice sessions suggest you're finding the latter." I set my bag down, unsure how to respond. Abernathy rarely discussed competition strategy. "You're using this," he continued, tapping the piano with one finger. "Using the instrument as it's meant to be used, not just to make sound, but to speak truth." Something about his unusual directness made my throat tighten. "I'm trying." He nodded once, briskly returning to his typical demeanor. Your Bach fugue still lacks proper voice delineation. Play it. For the next hour, we worked through my repertoire, his criticism as exacting as ever. But something had shifted subtly in our dynamic. It wasn't warmth. Abernathy didn't do warmth, but a form of respect that had previously been absent. As I was packing up to leave, he said, "The faculty recital this weekend features Alicia Michaels performing the Grieg Piano Concerto. You'll attend." It wasn't a question or even a suggestion. Abernathy had never required his students to attend performances before. "Of course," I said, confused but willing. "Backstage afterward, I'll introduce you." I froze. Alicia Michaels was one of the most celebrated pianists under 40, a rising star with recordings on Deutsche Grammophon and regular appearances with major orchestras worldwide. "Professor, Saturday, 7:30, don't be late." He turned his attention to his score, effectively dismissing me. I left his studio in a state of bewildered anticipation. Why would Abernathy want to introduce me to someone of Michael's caliber? Especially now, when I was practicing on borrowed time and borrowed instruments? The answer came on Saturday evening after the recital. Michael's performance had been mesmerizing, her interpretation of Grieg both technically immaculate and emotionally transcendent. I'd watched from the fourth row, heart racing at the thought of meeting her afterward. Backstage was crowded with faculty and donors holding plastic cups of cheap wine. Abernathy stood in a corner, deep in conversation with Michaels. He beckoned me over with an impatient gesture when he spotted me hovering by the door. "Ms. Michaels, this is Melissa Chen, the student I mentioned." Alicia Michaels was smaller in person than she appeared on stage, with an intensity to her gaze that seemed to evaluate everything in a single glance. "Abernathy tells me you're preparing Rachmaninoff 2 for Whitmore while dealing with a significant loss." I shot a surprised look at my professor, who avoided my eyes. He'd actually told someone about my situation? "My piano was sold without my knowledge," I confirmed, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I've been practicing wherever and whenever I can." Michael smiled slightly. "Been there. My stepfather pawned my first upright to pay gambling debts. I practiced on a cardboard keyboard for 6 months." She set down her wine glass. "Robert says you have promise." Coming from Abernathy, promise was the equivalent of another teacher's effusive praise. I felt heat rising to my cheeks. "I'm staying in Boston for the next month as artist in residence," Michaels continued. "I've been assigned a practice studio in the East Wing with a decent Steinway. I only need it from 2 to 6 down p.m. The rest of the time, it's yours if you want it." She reached into her bag and handed me a key card. "Security knows you'll be using it. There's a couch in there too, in case you need to crash between sessions." I stared at the key card, unable to find words. Abernathy cleared his throat. "Ms. Chen was just telling me how grateful she is for this opportunity." "Yes," I managed. "Incredibly grateful. Thank you." Michaels waved away my thanks. "Pay it. Forward someday. Our world has enough obstacles without losing our instruments." She glanced at her watch. "I should mingle. Nice meeting you, Melissa. Looking forward to hearing how Whitmore goes." As she walked away, I turned to Abernathy. "You told her about my piano?" "I mentioned you were demonstrating unusual commitment, despite challenging circumstances." He straightened his perpetually crooked bow tie. "The practice room arrangement is practical for all parties. Use it wisely." "Yes, sir. Thank you." "Your Rachmaninoff cadenza still rushes in the 30-second note passages. Fix it before preliminaries." He nodded curtly and moved away to join a group of faculty members. I clutched the keycard, a strange lightness spreading through my chest. For the first time since discovering my piano missing, I felt something like hope. The studio Michaels had granted me access to was superior to even Abernathy's, a dedicated practice space with proper soundproofing, excellent acoustics, and a Steinway B that had recently been regulated. The couch was worn but comfortable, and a small refrigerator hummed quietly in the corner. It was, in almost every way, a pianist's sanctuary. My new schedule evolved around Michael's practice time. I'd arrive at 6:30 a.m., practice until 1:30 p.m., vacate for her session, then return at 6:30 p.m. until midnight or later. Sometimes I'd find notes from her on the music stand, brief comments about pedaling or phrasing that revealed her own approach to certain technical challenges. Once, I arrived to find a paper bag containing a sandwich, an apple, and a note that read simply, "Performers who don't eat don't win. Am." The interaction was minimal but meaningful. We passed each other briefly during the handoff times, sometimes exchanging a few words about repertoire or upcoming concerts. She never asked about my family or my missing piano, and I appreciated that. In the studio, only the music mattered. A week before preliminaries, I was packing up to leave as Michaels arrived for her session. She set down her bag and leaned against the piano, studying me with that intense gaze. "Play me your Bach," she said abruptly. I blinked in surprise. "Now? Consider it a dress rehearsal." Heart suddenly pounding, I set my bag down and returned to the bench. Bach's Prelude and Fugue in a minor was my preliminary round opener, the piece that would set the tone for my entire performance. I took a deep breath and began. The prelude flowed from my fingers with a clarity I'd been working toward for months. The fugue followed, its complex contrapuntal lines weaving together with growing confidence. When I finished, the final chord resonated in the silent room. Michaels didn't speak immediately. She walked around the piano slowly, as if examining it from different angles might give her new insights into my playing. "You've found the architecture," she said finally, "but you're still playing like someone who's afraid of being dismissed." The observation struck uncomfortably close to home. "Bach wasn't tentative," she continued. "Neither was Rachmaninoff. And from what Robert tells me, neither are you, except sometimes when you play." "I'm working on it," I said, trying not to sound defensive. "Work faster." She smiled to soften the bluntness. Preliminary rounds are won by players who command attention from the first note. You have the technique. You have the understanding. What you're holding back is the conviction that you deserve to be heard. The phrase echoed in my mind long after our conversation ended. Deserve to be heard. Wasn't that precisely what my family had denied me? The conviction that my music, my passion, deserved space and attention in our home. That evening, instead of returning immediately to practice, I took a rare detour. The bus dropped me off 3 blocks from home, and I walked slowly through our neighborhood in the soft spring twilight. Cherry trees had begun to bloom, their pale pink petals occasionally drifting down to rest on meticulously maintained lawns. Our house glowed with warm light as I approached. Through the living room window, I could see my parents and Amber gathered around the coffee table, looking at something with animated expressions. As I drew closer, I realized they were examining a photo album, the one containing pictures from my early piano recitals and competitions. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching this bizarre tableau. Why would they be looking at my musical history when they'd so carelessly discarded its central instrument? I entered quietly through the side door, setting my bag down in the kitchen before moving to the living room entrance. They hadn't heard me come in. "Really was talented, even back then," my father was saying, pointing at a photo. "Remember how that judge said she had unusual maturity in her Bach interpretations?" My mother nodded, smiling nostalgically. "She worked so hard on that piece, practiced until we had to make her stop for dinner." "I remember being so jealous," Amber added, turning a page. "I wanted to be good at something the way Mel was good at piano." I cleared my throat, and 3 heads snapped up in surprise. "Melissa!" Mom straightened, closing the album quickly as if caught doing something embarrassing. "We didn't hear you come in." "Obviously," I said, confused by the strange guilt on their faces. "What are you doing?" An uncomfortable silence followed. Finally, Dad spoke. "Mrs. Lawson called today. She mentioned seeing your name on the Whitmore competition preliminary list. Karen Lawson was our neighbor, a violinist with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. We'd never been particularly close." "She was quite impressed," Mom added. "Said it's very competitive to even get a preliminary slot." I stood still, trying to process this bizarre conversation. "I've been working toward Whitmore for years. It's not exactly a secret." "We knew you were taking it seriously, of course," Dad said, his tone suggesting they'd been fully supportive all along. "But Mrs. Lawson said the winner performs with the Philharmonic." "Boston Philharmonic," I corrected automatically. "Yes, that's the first prize." "Why didn't you tell us it was such a big deal?" Mom asked, sounding genuinely perplexed. The question landed like a slap. I'd mentioned Whitmore countless times over dinner, at family gatherings, in casual conversation. I'd explained the repertoire requirements, the judging panel, the prize structure. I'd talked about previous winners and their career trajectories. All of it had apparently registered as white noise to my family. "I did tell you," I said quietly. "Many times." Another uncomfortable silence fell. Amber shifted in her seat, tugging at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Well," Dad said finally, his tone brightening artificially, "we're very proud of you for making it this far. When are the preliminaries?" "Next Saturday. Not that it matters to you." "Of course it matters," Mom protested. "We'll be there to support you." I laughed then, a short, harsh sound that surprised even me. "With what? Encouragement? You sold my piano." "For a prom dress and living room renovations." The words hung in the air between us. My father looked away first, suddenly very interested in straightening a coaster on the coffee table. "That was a practical decision," he said, repeating the IT justification that had become his mantra. "No, it was a statement about what you value," I replied, surprising myself with my calm clarity. "And it wasn't me or my music." "That's not fair, Melissa," Mom began. "Isn't it? You knew I was preparing for the most important competition of my undergraduate career. You knew Grandpa's piano was essential to my practice routine. You knew what that instrument meant to me, and you sold it anyway, without even a conversation." "We thought you'd understand," Dad said weakly. "I understand perfectly. You can sit here looking at old photos and feeling nostalgic about my talent. But when it came to actually supporting that talent, Amber's prom dress took priority." My sister flinched at being directly implicated. "That's not," Mom started, then stopped. "Not what? Not true? Tell me what part isn't true." No one answered. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. "That's what I thought. Don't worry about coming to preliminaries. I already know exactly how much my music matters to this family." I turned and walked up to my room, closing the door quietly behind me. No slamming, no dramatics necessary. The truth had finally been spoken aloud, and there was a certain peace in that honesty, painful though it was. The night before preliminaries, I stayed late in Michael's studio, running through my entire program one final time. The Bach had reached a level of clarity I'd never achieved before. The Beethoven thundered and whispered with dynamic contrasts that felt organic rather than calculated. The Rachmaninoff, though I'd only perform it if I advanced to finals, had become an extension of my emotional landscape, its Russian soul somehow merging with my Chinese-American one to create something uniquely mine. As I played the final chords of Rachmaninoff's cadenza, the studio door opened quietly. Michael stood there listening. "It's late," she said when I finished. "You should be resting before tomorrow." "One last run-through," I explained, flexing my tired fingers. She entered fully, setting down her bag. You know why Rachmaninoff wrote that concerto? I nodded. After his first symphony was panned by critics, he suffered depression and couldn't compose for years. This was his comeback. His resurrection, she corrected, from creative death to new life, from silence to voice. She sat on the couch, regarding me thoughtfully. Tomorrow, remember you're not just playing notes on a page. You're continuing a tradition of musicians who faced obstacles and created anyway, who lost instruments, opportunities, support, and still made music that outlived their struggles. I closed the fallboard gently. Thank you. For everything. She shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude as most serious musicians tend to be. Get some sleep. Preliminary slots are determined by random draw, and early performers need to be sharp regardless of the hour. I gathered my scores and water bottle, mentally preparing for the short walk to the bus stop. Melissa, Michaels called as I reached the door. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already proven something important. What's that? That no one can take your music from you. Not really. She gestured to the now closed piano. Instruments can be sold. Opportunities can be denied. But what's in you? That belongs only to you. I nodded, throat suddenly tight, and left without further words. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect Boston spring weather. I arrived at the competition venue, Jordan Hall at the New England Conservatory, 2 hours before the preliminary round was scheduled to begin. Other competitors were already warming up in practice rooms, their musical fragments drifting down the hallways like nervous ghosts. I found a vacant room and spent 30 minutes on technical exercises, keeping my fingers warm and flexible without tiring them. Then I changed into my performance attire, a simple black dress with 3/4 sleeves that wouldn't restrict my movement at the keyboard. My hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, my grandmother's jade earrings the only personal touch. At the competitors' meeting, we drew numbers for performance order. I selected number 7 out of 24, not ideal, but not terrible. Early enough that the jury wouldn't be fatigued, late enough that the acoustics and piano would be properly settled. As we dispersed to prepare, I noticed a familiar figure in the lobby. Professor Abernathy stood near the entrance, looking characteristically uncomfortable in social settings. When he saw me, he beckoned with a curt nod. "Your warm-up was adequate," he said by way of greeting, having apparently observed me without my knowledge. "Remember that Jordan Hall's acoustics favor clarity over excessive pedaling." "Yes, Professor, thank you for coming." He adjusted his bow tie. "The jury includes 2 former teachers of mine. Their judgment, while not infallible, is generally sound." This was Abernathy's version of reassurance, acknowledging that the competition would at least be fair. "I'll do my best," I promised. "Your best has improved considerably," he replied, the closest thing to a compliment he'd ever offered. "Now go prepare. I'll be in the hall." I returned to the warm-up area, running passages mentally while keeping my fingers limber. Competitors before me were called one by one. Some returned looking relieved, others devastated. I tried to focus only on my own preparation, blocking out both the triumphs and disasters unfolding around me. Finally, my name was called. I walked through the backstage area, pausing for the traditional moment of centering before stepping onto the historic stage of Jordan Hall. The magnificent space, with its renowned acoustics and storied history, seemed to hold its breath as I approached the Steinway Concert Grand. I adjusted the bench, took a deep breath, and placed my hands on the keys. In that moment, everything outside the hall ceased to exist. No family drama, no missing piano, no competition pressure. Just box-perfect architecture waiting to be brought to life. I began the A minor prelude with new conviction. Each note rang clear in the perfect acoustics, each phrase shaped with intention rather than habit. The fugue followed seamlessly, its complex voice-leading unfolding with a clarity that felt almost transcendent. As the final chord resonated through the hall, I allowed myself the briefest pause before transitioning to Beethoven. The Waldstein erupted with revolutionary energy. Beethoven's triumph over his encroaching deafness translated through my fingers into sound that filled every corner of the hall. The technical challenges, rapid octaves, hand crossings, the infamous glissando passage, passed under my fingers with a security born of countless hours of practice. But it was the quieter moments, the suspended harmonies and whispered phrases, that truly captured the piece's soul. When I finished, the hall remained silent for a moment before the jury chairman's voice came from the darkness. "Thank you, Ms. Chen." I bowed and exited the stage, hands trembling slightly with adrenaline and effort. In the backstage area, I allowed myself a moment of honest assessment. It had been good. Perhaps the best I'd ever played those pieces. Whether it would be enough to advance to finals remained to be seen, but I had nothing to regret about my performance. Outside in the lobby, Professor Abernathy waited, his expression giving away nothing. "Well?" I asked when I reached him. The Bach showed maturity. The Beethoven had moments of genuine insight. He paused. It was a finalist's performance. Coming from Abernathy, this was equivalent to ecstatic praise. I felt a smile break across my face despite my attempt at professional composure. "Results will be posted in approximately 1 hour, he continued. "I suggest you eat something and rest your hands." I nodded, too keyed up to feel hungry, but knowing he was right about the need for fuel and recovery. As I turned toward the cafe area, I froze. Standing awkwardly near the entrance were my parents and Amber. "What are you doing here?" I asked when I reached them, genuine confusion overriding any attempt at politeness. "We came to support you," Mom said, eyes scanning my face nervously. "How did it go?" "Professor Abernathy thinks I may have made finals," I replied, still processing their unexpected presence. "That's wonderful!" Dad exclaimed with forced enthusiasm. "We're so proud of you." I studied them, their uncomfortable postures, their Sunday best clothing, their expressions of artificial cheer. They looked like strangers attending an event where they knew no one and understood nothing. "Thank you for coming," I said finally, the words feeling hollow. "The results will be posted soon. I need to get something to eat." "We brought this," Amber said, holding out a small thermal lunch bag. "Your favorite sandwich from Brighton Deli. Turkey with avocado and that spicy mayo you like." The gesture was so unexpected that I simply stared at the bag for a moment before accepting it. "Thanks." An awkward silence fell between us. "Melissa," Mom began hesitantly, "we know we made a terrible mistake with the piano. We're trying to make it right." "How exactly do you plan to do that?" I asked, not unkindly, but with genuine curiosity. "We've been talking to Johnson's Music," Dad explained. "They haven't sold it yet. It's still in their warehouse. If you advance to finals, we'll buy it back." The offer landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples of complicated emotion. Part of me wanted to laugh at the conditional nature of their support. I had to prove my worth by advancing before my instrument would be returned. Another part recognized that this was, in their limited way, an attempt at atonement. I searched for the right words. "That's a start." "We know it doesn't fix everything," Mom said quietly. "But we're trying to understand what we didn't before." I nodded, unable to fully process this development while still riding the adrenaline wave of my performance. "I should prepare for results. You can wait if you want to." They nodded, retreating to seats in the lobby as I found a quiet corner to eat the sandwich Amber had brought. It was indeed my favorite. She'd remembered that detail correctly. As I ate, I tried to reconcile the family who had so carelessly sold my piano with these awkward, remorseful people trying to make amends. The truth, I realized, was that they were the same people. They hadn't suddenly developed understanding or appreciation for classical music. They hadn't magically transformed into supporters of artistic pursuit. But something had shifted in their perception. Perhaps Mrs. Lawson's comments, perhaps their own reflection on what they'd done, perhaps some combination of factors I'd never fully comprehend. An hour later, the preliminary results were posted. A small crowd gathered around the bulletin board, competitors searching for their names among the 8 finalists. I stood back, heart pounding, waiting for the initial rush to subside. Professor Abernathy appeared at my elbow, somehow having worked his way through the crowd. "Congratulations," he said simply. "You perform 4th in the final round, tomorrow at 2 p.m. I exhaled slowly, relief and excitement washing over me in alternating waves. "Thank you, Professor." "Your Rachmaninoff still needs work. The recapitulation in the development section lacks sufficient dynamic contrast. Come to the studio at 7 a.m. tomorrow for final adjustments." I nodded, grateful for his unchanging standards even in moments of success. "I'll be there." As the crowd dispersed, my family approached cautiously, reading my expression. "You made finals," Dad stated rather than asked, noting my contained smile. "Yes, I perform tomorrow afternoon." "We'll be there," Mom promised. "And we've already called Johnson's Music. They're delivering your piano on Monday, regardless of tomorrow's outcome." I blinked in surprise. "Regardless?" "It's your piano," Amber said quietly. "It always was. We just forgot that for a while." Something tight in my chest loosened slightly. Not completely, but enough to allow a deeper breath than I'd taken in weeks. "Thank you," I said simply. As we walked out of the conservatory into the bright spring afternoon, I felt a strange sense of balance being restored. Not completely. Some damage couldn't be undone with a single gesture, no matter how sincere. But it was a beginning, a recognition that some things cannot be measured in practical terms or replaceable value. Tomorrow would bring the final round, Rachmaninoff's magnificent concerto with all its technical demands and emotional depths. I would play it on yet another borrowed piano, drawing on weeks of practice on instruments that weren't mine. But soon, my own piano would return home. And with it, perhaps, a new understanding in my family of what it meant to truly support someone's passion. As we reached the street, Professor Abernathy called my name. He stood at the top of the stone steps, looking characteristically uncomfortable, to be initiating a social interaction. "Ms. Chen, a moment." I excused myself from my family and returned to where he waited. "Alicia Michaels will be attending tomorrow's finals," he said without preamble. "She has postponed a masterclass to be present." I swallowed, suddenly nervous at the thought of my unexpected mentor hearing my performance. "Don't look alarmed," Abernathy continued impatiently. "She wouldn't bother if she didn't think you had something worth saying through Rachmaninoff. I'll try not to disappoint her. Or you." He dismissed this with a wave of his hand. "Disappointment is irrelevant. Music matters. Tomorrow, play like someone who deserves to be heard." As I rejoined my waiting family, those words echoed in my mind. Deserves to be heard. For weeks, I'd been playing from a place of loss, channeling hurt and betrayal into Rachmaninoff's emotional landscape. Now, standing on the cusp of a significant achievement with my family awkwardly attempting reconciliation, I faced a new challenge. Playing not from loss, but from recovery. Not from absence, but from return. Tomorrow, I would play like someone who deserves to be heard. Not because a competition jury would be listening. Not because Alicia Michaels would be evaluating my interpretation. Not even because my family would finally be paying attention. But because the music deserved it. Because Rachmaninoff's journey, from creative silence to triumphant voice, deserved an interpreter who understood something about resurrection. Because some stories can only be told through 88 keys and human hands willing to bring them to life. And that, I realized, as we walked together through the golden afternoon light, was something no one could ever sell away from me. The morning of the Whitmore finals dawned with a crystalline clarity that seemed almost theatrical in its perfection. Golden light streamed through my bedroom window as I lay awake, having barely slept. My mind had replayed passages of Rachmaninoff. Throughout the night, the thunderous opening chords, the lyrical second theme, the treacherous cadenza with its cascading arpeggios and leaping octaves. My fingers had moved restlessly across the sheets, practicing in silence. I rose at 5:30, dressing quietly in comfortable clothes for the morning practice session with Professor Abernathy. The house was still silent as I made my way downstairs, but a note waited on the kitchen counter in my mother's neat handwriting. "We'll meet you at Jordan Hall at 1:30. Your piano returns Monday. Love, Mom." The simplicity of the note, its acknowledgement of both my performance and the promised return of my instrument, created a complex tangle of emotions I didn't have time to unravel. I folded it carefully into my wallet and slipped out into the cool morning air. The university campus was quiet at this hour, just the occasional maintenance worker or dedicated jogger disturbing the stillness. The music building stood as a solitary beacon of activity, lights already glowing in scattered practice rooms where other competitors were undoubtedly making their final preparations. Professor Abernathy was waiting in his studio, 2 cups of coffee on the small side table. He handed one to me without comment, a gesture so uncharacteristically thoughtful that I nearly asked if he was feeling well. "The Rachmaninoff," he said, without preamble. "From the development section, now." I set my coffee down, removed my jacket, and moved to the piano. Without sheet music, the concerto had long since been committed to memory. I launched into the middle section of the first movement, where thematic material is transformed through a series of modulations. Abernathy listened with unnerving intensity, his eyes closed, body completely still. I played through to the recapitulation, where the main theme returns with thunderous authority. "Again," he said when I finished. "This time, listen to the harmonic, underpinning in measures 157 through 164. Rachmaninoff creates tension through delayed resolution. Your interpretation must honor that delay." For the next hour, we dissected the concerto in microscopic detail, voicing in the left hand, pedaling techniques for specific passages, the precise timing of rubato in transitional phrases. It wasn't so much a lesson as a surgical procedure, each element examined and refined with clinical precision. Finally, Abernathy closed the score. That should suffice. I flexed my fingers, both energized and drained by the intense session. "Thank you, Professor." He nodded curtly. "The accompanist today is Jeffrey Palmer. He tends to rush in virtuosic passages. Be prepared to lead clearly in the cadenza transition." This was typical Abernathy, practical information delivered without emotional context. The fact that he'd researched the tendencies of today's accompanist was yet another small sign of his investment in my success. "I'll be ready," I promised. "Indeed." He gathered his materials, then paused. "Ms. Chen." "Yes?" Rachmaninoff wrote this concerto after a period of profound creative silence. His first symphony had been savaged by critics, leaving him unable to compose for years. This piece represents not just his return to composition, but his defiance of those who dismissed him. I nodded, familiar with the composer's history. "Today, play not from a place of loss, but from resurrection." His eyes met mine directly, a rare occurrence. "Understood?" The word choice couldn't have been accidental. Resurrection. Not recovery. Not return, but resurrection. Implying something more profound, more transformative than mere restoration. "Understood," I replied. He nodded once and left the studio, his parting instruction hanging in the air between us. Play from resurrection. It was perhaps the most poetic guidance he had ever offered. I spent another hour practicing specific passages, then forced myself to stop. Overplaying on competition day was a common mistake among nervous performers, leading to fatigue, tension, and diminished responsiveness during the actual performance. Instead, I found a quiet corner of the library to review the score mentally, visualizing each passage while physically relaxing. At noon, I ate a light lunch of yogurt and fruit, knowing from experience that a heavy meal before performing would only make me sluggish. As I was gathering my things to head to Jordan Hall, my phone vibrated with an incoming message from an unknown number. Technical brilliance is common. Authentic voice is rare. Trust yours today. Am, Alicia Michaels. The unexpected encouragement brought a smile to my face. I didn't reply. What could I possibly say to a pianist of her caliber? But the message steadied something in me, a reminder that music existed beyond competitions and family drama. Jordan Hall was already humming with activity when I arrived at 1 p.m. Staff members adjusted stands and chairs on stage while technicians made final adjustments to the Steinway concert grand. Fellow competitors warmed up in practice rooms or paced nervously in the corridors. I found a quiet corner to change into my performance attire, a simple black dress with elbow-length sleeves and a modest neckline. Professional, elegant, but not distracting. I secured my hair in a neat chignon and added my grandmother's jade earrings, the same ones I'd worn for preliminaries. Not superstition exactly, but a connection to a woman who had always believed in my musical voice, even when she could no longer hear it herself. The finalists' gathering was called at 1:30. We assembled in a small reception room, 8 nervous young musicians trying to project confidence while inwardly battling our respective demons. The competition director reviewed the performance order and timing regulations, reminding us that we would be playing with piano accompaniment rather than orchestra. Each of you has already demonstrated exceptional artistry to reach this stage, she concluded. Today is simply an opportunity to share that artistry more fully. A lovely sentiment, though it did little to calm the collective anxiety in the room. As we dispersed to our final preparations, I spotted my family in the lobby. All 3 of them dressed formally, looking both proud and uncomfortable in the unfamiliar setting of a classical music competition. "Melissa!" my mother waved, her smile tight with nervous energy. "You look beautiful, honey." "Thanks, Mom." I accepted her quick hug, noticing that my father seemed unusually subdued. "Everything okay, Dad?" He nodded, clearing his throat. "Just thinking about your grandfather. He would have been very proud today." The unexpected reference to Grandpa caught me off guard. My father rarely mentioned him, especially in connection to my music. "He loved hearing you play," Dad continued, his voice softer than usual. "Used to tell his friends at the VA that his granddaughter had magic in her fingers." A lump formed in my throat. I didn't know that. "There's a lot I haven't paid attention to," he admitted. "I'm trying to do better." Before I could respond, Amber thrust a small box into my hands. "Open it," she urged, "for luck." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a miniature piano crafted in surprising detail. "I used some of my prom dress fund," she explained, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "The piano's coming home Monday, but I thought you should have something today." I stared at the bracelet, then at my sister, seeing a glimpse of the little girl who had once drawn crayon pictures of me playing at Carnegie Hall. "Thank you," I said softly, slipping it onto my wrist. "It's perfect." A competition assistant appeared at my elbow. "Ms. Chen, you're needed backstage. You perform 4th in approximately 40 minutes. I nodded, suddenly very aware of the increasing audience murmur from the hall and the weight of the moment at hand. "We'll be right here," Mom promised, squeezing my arm gently. "No matter what happens." "Break a leg," Amber added, with forced cheerfulness. "Not literally, because you need your feet for the pedals, but you know what I mean." I smiled at her awkward attempt at musician humor. "I know what you mean." Backstage was organized chaos. stage managers with clipboards, adjustments, to the piano bench height, last-minute consultations between performers and accompanists. I found Jeffrey Palmer, the veteran pianist who would be accompanying the concerto selections today. At 60-something, with silver hair and perpetually ink-stained fingers, Palmer had a reputation for technical brilliance and occasional impatience. Rachmaninoff second, yes? He confirmed, barely looking up from his score. Yes, first movement. Cadenza transition can be tricky. Don't rush into it. I won't, I promised, remembering Abernathy's warning about Palmer's own tendency to rush. He nodded curtly. Good luck then. The first performer was called to the stage, a serious young man from Eastman playing Tchaikovsky's first concerto. I retreated to a quiet corner, deliberately avoiding listening to the other performances. Comparison was the thief of joy, as Abernathy often reminded his students, and hearing others now would only invite unhelpful mental comparisons. Instead, I closed my eyes and mentally revisited the Rachmaninoff, hearing it in my mind with perfect clarity. Not just the notes, but the emotional landscape behind them, the despair that preceded the composition, the triumph of creating something so magnificent after years of silence, the resurrection that Abernathy had referenced. My name was called. Sooner than expected, I rose, took a deep breath, and walked toward the stage. In the wings, I paused for a moment of centering, feeling the weight of the silver piano charm against my wrist. Play from resurrection, not loss. I stepped onto the stage, acknowledging the applause with a modest bow before taking my place at the magnificent Steinway. Jeffrey Palmer joined me, adjusting the bench beside mine as we prepared for the concerto. Jordan Hall stretched before me, its perfect acoustics and elegant architecture a fitting venue for Rachmaninoff's masterpiece. In the dim audience, I could just make out my family in the fifth row, Professor Abernathy a few seats away. And there, in the far corner, partially hidden by a column, Alicia Michaels, her posture unmistakable even at a distance. I placed my hands on the keys, feeling their cool ivory surface against my fingertips. The moment of silence before music begins is perhaps the most profound in all of performing arts. Potential energy waiting to be transformed into kinetic, intention poised to become expression. Palmer nodded, and I began. The famous opening. Chords of Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto resonated through the hall, dark, bell-like tones that grow in intensity with each repetition. They flowed from my hands with a conviction that surprised even me, as if the months of practice had crystallized in this moment into something beyond mere technical execution. The main theme emerged, that gloriously Russian melody full of yearning and determination. I shaped each phrase with deliberate care, creating the architectural structure that Abernathy had insisted upon while allowing the emotional content to breathe naturally. Palmer proved to be an excellent partner, his accompaniment, supporting rather than competing with my interpretation. When the development section arrived, the passage we had worked on so intensively that morning, I leaned into the harmonic tensions, allowing each delayed resolution to create its full effect before releasing into the next phrase. The cadenza approached. That moment of solitary expression where the piano stands alone before the orchestra returns. I signaled clearly to Palmer, who nodded almost imperceptibly as I launched into the cascade of notes that forms the technical climax of the movement. Time seemed to suspend itself. The treacherous passages that had once required such conscious attention now flowed through my fingers as naturally as breathing. Each arpeggio, each leaping octave, each contrapuntal line emerged with clarity and purpose. But it wasn't the technical execution that mattered most. It was the story being told through these notes, Rachmaninoff's journey from creative death to triumphant return, from silence to voice. A journey that now resonated with my own in ways I couldn't have anticipated when I first began learning this concerto months ago. As the recapitulation arrived with its thunderous return of the main theme, I felt something shift within me. No longer was I playing from a place of loss or anger, from the empty space where my piano had been. Instead, each note came from a deeper wellspring of understanding of what it means to lose something essential and yet continue, to have your voice silenced and find it again. Resurrection, not just recovery. The movement built toward its final climax, the coda gathering momentum like a river approaching a waterfall. Palmer and I moved as one musical organism now, the years between us dissolved in service to Rachmaninoff's vision. The final chords rang out, decisive, triumphant, resolute, before fading into a silence as profound as the one that had preceded the performance. For a moment, Jordan Hall remained absolutely still. Then applause erupted. Not the polite, measured appreciation of a competition audience, but something more spontaneous and genuine. I rose, slightly dazed, and bowed to acknowledge both the audience and Palmer, who nodded with newfound respect. As I exited the stage, the applause continued. In the wings, I leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how completely the performance had consumed my physical and emotional resources. My hands trembled slightly, adrenaline still coursing through my system. "Well done," said a stagehand, handing me a bottle of water. "Haven't heard that kind of response all day." I smiled gratefully, too drained for words, and made my way to the green room where performers waited after their presentations. The remaining finalists glanced up as I entered, their expressions a mixture of congratulation and heightened nerves. We all recognized when someone had set a new standard for the day. I changed from my performance heels to comfortable flats and sipped water slowly, allowing my body to recover from the intense focus of performance. My phone vibrated with a message, Amber, sending a simple row of fire emojis followed by... Apparently, my family had appreciated the performance, even without the musical vocabulary to articulate why. The remaining finalists performed over the next hour. I listened from the green room monitor, impressed by the high level of artistry among my fellow competitors. The final performer, a poised young woman from Curtis playing Prokofiev's Third Concerto, delivered a technically flawless rendition that drew enthusiastic applause. After all performances were complete, the 8 finalists were called back to the stage for a group bow. We stood in a line, acknowledging the audience with professional collegiality despite the competitive context. The jury chairman approached the microphone. "The jury will now deliberate," he announced. "Results will be posted in approximately 45 minutes. Until then, please enjoy refreshments in the lobby." We filed off stage, the tension palpable among us despite our attempts at casual conversation. In the lobby, family members and teachers gathered around their respective performers, offering congratulations and assessment. My parents and Amber rushed over, their faces flushed with excitement. "Melissa, that was incredible!" Mom gushed, hugging me tightly. "Everyone was watching you." Dad nodded, his usual reserve softened by genuine pride. "I've never understood your music the way I did today. It was like you were telling a story without words." "That's exactly what she was doing," came Professor Abernathy's voice as he joined our circle. Ms. Chen's interpretation demonstrated genuine understanding of Rachmaninoff's compositional intent. Coming from Abernathy, this was the equivalent of ecstatic praise. I felt heat rising to my cheeks. "Thank you, Professor." He nodded curtly. The jury would be remiss not to recognize such maturity of interpretation. With that cryptic assessment of my chances, he moved away, uncomfortable as always in social situations. Amber squeezed my arm. "Does this mean you might win?" "It means I played well today," I replied, unwilling to speculate further. "That's all anyone can do." The waiting period passed in a blur of congratulations from fellow students and faculty members who had attended the competition. I accepted their kind words with appropriate modesty, but inside, a cautious hope was building. Not just for the competition results, but for something more significant, the sense that I had truly found my musical voice today, regardless of the jury's decision. At precisely the promised time, the competition director emerged with a single sheet of paper in hand. The lobby fell immediately silent as she approached the bulletin board, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Before I post the results," she announced, "I want to congratulate all of our finalists. The jury has asked me to express that the overall standard today was exceptional." A polite murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. "The results are as follows," she continued. "Third prize goes to Eliza Park from the Curtis Institute." Applause broke out as the young woman who had played Prokofiev stepped forward to accept her certificate and envelope. Second prize goes to James Harrington from Eastman School of Music. The serious young man who had opened the competition with Tchaikovsky nodded with dignified acceptance of his placement. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was certain everyone around me could hear it. Second and third places awarded. Only first prize remained. And first prize. The director paused, drawing out the moment with practiced dramatic timing, goes to Melissa Chen from Boston University. The world seemed to tilt slightly. I heard my name repeated in my mother's excited voice, felt Amber's arms around me in an enthusiastic hug, saw Professor Abernathy's normally impassive face break into the briefest smile before returning to its customary severity. "Go up there," Amber urged, giving me a gentle push toward the director who was waiting with the first prize certificate, envelope, and a modest crystal trophy. I moved forward in a daze, accepting the awards with a grateful bow. The director shook my hand, leaning close to add, "The jury vote was unanimous, my dear. That rarely happens." Photographers requested that the three winners pose together, then separately. Questions were asked about our backgrounds, our teachers, our future plans. I answered automatically, still processing the reality of what had just occurred. First prize. A unanimous jury decision. A solo performance with the Boston Philharmonic. $5,000. As the crowd began to disperse, I found my family waiting at the edge of the lobby. For once, they looked at a loss for words. Even Amber, who typically filled every silence with chatter. "I'm so proud of you," Mom finally said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Your grandfather would have been over the moon." Dad simply pulled me into an awkward but heartfelt hug. "That was your voice today," he said quietly. "I'm sorry we ever silenced it." The simple acknowledgement, both of my achievement and their role in almost preventing it, meant more than any elaborate apology could have. Amber dangled her car. Keys. "Mom and Dad said I could drive us to celebrate. Anywhere you want to go." Before I could respond, I noticed Alicia Michaels making her way toward our group. She moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention on international stages. "Congratulations, Melissa," she said when she reached us. "That was a performance worthy of any concert hall." I blushed deeply. "Thank you, Ms. Michaels. That means a lot coming from you." She smiled slightly. "First names now, please. You've earned that much." She glanced at my family. "You must be very proud." "We are," Mom confirmed, clearly starstruck at being addressed by a musician she recognized from public radio. "Are you one of Melissa's teachers?" "More of a temporary landlord," Alicia replied with a wry smile. "Your daughter has been borrowing my practice studio." Understanding dawned on my parents' faces. This was the international soloist who had stepped in when they had removed my instrument. "We're very grateful," Dad said, a hint of shame coloring his voice. "Melissa's piano is coming home on Monday." Alicia nodded approvingly. "Good. Every pianist needs their own instrument." She turned back to me. "I have a proposition for you if you're interested." "Of course," I replied, curiosity overriding fatigue. "I'm giving a master class at Tanglewood this summer. 3 weeks of intensive study with a small group of advanced pianists. The application deadline has passed, but I have discretion to invite one additional student." She paused. "Your Rachmaninoff today suggests you'd benefit from the program." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Tanglewood, the summer home of the Boston Symphony Orchestra and one of the most prestigious training grounds for young musicians in the country. "That's incredibly generous," I managed finally. "It's not generosity, it's recognition of potential," she corrected. "Think about it and let me know within the week. Professor Abernathy has my contact information." With a brief nod to my family, she moved away to speak with other faculty members. "Was that an invitation to Tanglewood?" Amber asked, eyes wide with vicarious excitement. "Like, the Tanglewood?" I nodded, still processing the rapid succession of events. Winning the Whitmore, the promised return of my piano, and now this unexpected opportunity. "We should discuss it as a family," Mom suggested as we gathered our things to leave. "There must be costs involved, and the timing with your university schedule." "Mom," Dad interrupted gently, "this isn't a family decision, it's Melissa's. We've already made one mistake by not recognizing the seriousness of her music. The simple acknowledgement that my musical decisions were mine to make felt like the final piece of a complex resolution falling into place." "You're right," Mom agreed after a moment. "Whatever you decide, Melissa, we'll support it." We stepped out of Jordan Hall into the late afternoon sunshine. Spring had fully arrived during the hours we'd spent inside. Trees along Commonwealth Avenue now sported delicate green leaves. Students sprawled on lawns enjoying the perfect weather. Street musicians played for tips near the subway entrances. "Where to for celebration dinner?" Amber asked, twirling her car keys impatiently. I considered the question, realizing that despite the momentous events of the day, what I wanted most was something familiar. "Can we go to that Chinese place in Newton? The one where Grandpa used to take us after my first recitals?" Dad smiled, genuine warmth replacing his usual reserve. Golden Dragon. Perfect choice. As we walked toward the parking garage, I felt the weight of the crystal trophy in my bag, the promise of my returning piano in my heart, and the unexpected lightness of reconciliation in my steps. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, preparing for the Philharmonic performance, considering Alicia's Tanglewood invitation, balancing university obligations with expanding musical opportunities. But today, this golden afternoon marked by resurrection, rather than loss, was enough, more than enough. My phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. I glanced down to see a text from Professor Abernathy, who had apparently overcome his technological reluctance to send a rare personal communication. Rachmaninoff would have approved. Monday, 8 a.m., we begin work on the rest of the concerto for the Philharmonic performance. I smiled, tucking the phone away. Some things would never change. Abernathy's demanding standards, early morning practices, the relentless pursuit of musical excellence. But other things had changed profoundly, creating a new landscape of possibility I was only beginning to explore. The Whitmore competition had been a goal for years, but now I understood it had also been a doorway, not just to professional opportunities, but to a deeper understanding of my own voice and its worth. A voice that deserved to be heard, even when others failed to recognize its value. A voice that could speak truth through 88 keys and the legacy of composers who had also known both silence and resurrection. As we reached the car, Amber nudged me playfully. "So, when you play with the Philharmonic, can I tell people my sister is famous?" I laughed, the sound coming easily for the first time in weeks. "I'm hardly famous." "Yet," Dad added quietly. "Hardly famous yet." The simple word, yet, contained a universe of possibility, of futures my parents had never imagined for me, but were now beginning to see. Not because a competition jury had validated my talent, but because they were finally learning to listen with new ears. Tomorrow, my piano would begin its journey home. But today, something even more important had already returned: the recognition that some gifts cannot be sold or silenced, only temporarily displaced. My music had always been mine, even without the instrument that gave it voice. In finding that truth, I had discovered a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. As we drove away from Jordan Hall toward celebration dinner, I glanced back at the historic building where so many musical legends had performed across the decades. Someday, perhaps, I might join their ranks on larger stages. For now, I had found my voice again, not just at the keyboard, but in the world. And that, more than any competition victory, felt like true resurrection. The Yamaha Baby Grand returned on Monday morning, just as promised. I stood in the driveway watching as two men from Johnson's Music carefully maneuvered it from their truck. My father hovered nearby, uncharacteristically nervous, checking his watch repeatedly as if the piano might vanish again if not reinstalled by a certain hour. "Be careful with that corner," he instructed unnecessarily as they navigated the front steps. The older mover, gray-haired and sturdy, shot him a look that suggested he'd been moving pianos since before my father was born. "It's the same instrument?" I asked quietly, noting a new polish on the ebony surface that hadn't been there before. "Exact same," Dad confirmed. "Johnson had it fully regulated and tuned as part of the—" He hesitated. "The return arrangement." I nodded, understanding the unspoken. The arrangement had undoubtedly cost more than the original sale price, a financial penalty my parents had accepted without complaint. The movers positioned the piano precisely where it had stood before, the faint impressions in the carpet guiding them. When they finished, the older man handed me a folder containing maintenance records and the regulation invoice. "She's in perfect condition now," he said, using the feminine pronoun that professional piano movers often employ. "Better than when she left, if I'm honest. Thomas in our shop said to tell you he adjusted the action on the middle register. Said you'd notice." "Thank you," I replied, touched by the unknown technician's attention to detail. After the movers departed, I stood alone with the instrument, my family having tactfully retreated to give me space for this reunion. The living room felt balanced again, as if a missing limb had been restored. I ran my fingers lightly over the fallboard, then lifted it to reveal the keys, familiar ivory that had known my touch since childhood. I sat on the bench, adjusted its height, and placed my hands in position. For a long moment, I didn't play, just felt the connection reestablishing itself between my fingers and this particular instrument. Then gently, I began Bach's Prelude in C major, the first piece Grandpa had taught me on this very piano. The tone was indeed improved, richer, in the middle register, more responsive throughout. The regulation had been expertly done, with attention to details only a performer would notice. As the final chord faded, I became aware of my mother standing in the doorway, eyes suspiciously bright. "Welcome home," she said simply. I nodded, unable to find adequate words for the moment. Instead, I turned back to the keyboard and continued playing. This time Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, its passionate phrases filling our home once again with the sound that had been missing for too long. That evening, as I finished practicing the concerto's third movement, Professor Abernathy called with unexpected news. "The Philharmonic performance has been rescheduled," he announced without preamble. "May 15th instead of June 10th. I calculated, quickly, less than 3 weeks away. That's soon. Indeed. Maestro Lindbergh had a conducting engagement in Vienna cancel. He wants to complete our performance before leaving for Europe. Abernathy's tone suggested this was both a compliment and a challenge. You'll need to accelerate your preparation. Schedule. I'll be ready, I promised, already mentally rearranging my practice routine. Rehearsals begin next Monday. 3 orchestral sessions, 1 dress. The maestro expects you to be performance-ready at the first meeting. He paused. This is an opportunity, Ms. Chen. Professional orchestras rarely adjust their schedules. That they've done so suggests significant interest in your interpretation. After we hung up, I sat at the piano, considering the implications. The Boston Philharmonic, a professional orchestra with international reputation, had rearranged their calendar to accommodate an earlier performance of my Rachmaninoff. Whatever, impression I'd made at the Whitmore finals had clearly extended beyond the competition jury to the orchestra's music director. I began practicing immediately, focusing on the technical challenges of the concerto's third movement. The familiar resistance of my own piano's action felt like a homecoming, each key responding exactly as I expected, the pedals offering the precise control I'd missed during weeks of playing borrowed instruments. Hours passed in concentrated work. When I finally stopped, it was past midnight. The house had gone quiet, my family long since retired. I closed the fallboard gently and rose, stretching tired muscles. A small plate covered with plastic wrap sat on the side table, cookies and a glass of milk, with a note in Amber's handwriting. Fuel for the musical genius. Don't practice too late. Some of us need beauty sleep before prom. I smiled, touched by the gesture from my sister. Her prom was this weekend, the event that had catalyzed the piano's removal in the first place. The irony wasn't lost on me, but the resentment had faded, replaced by a more complex understanding. Not forgiveness exactly, but perspective. The following days established a new rhythm. Mornings at the university for classes and ensemble rehearsals. Afternoons practicing the concerto at home on my restored piano. Evenings divided between academic work and more practice. My parents gave me wide berth, careful not to interrupt or complain about the hours of Rachmaninoff filling the house. On Friday evening, prom night, I deliberately finished practice early. Amber's preparations had consumed the household all. Day, hair appointment, makeup session, nail styling, each stage documented with selfies and accompanied by varying levels of drama. I emerged from my room as she was preparing to leave, resplendent in the champagne-colored gown that had inadvertently caused such upheaval in our family. She turned from the mirror when I entered, uncertainty flickering across her carefully, made-up face. "You look beautiful," I said honestly. Relief softened her features. "Really? The dress isn't too much?" "It's perfect," I assured her. "Your date won't know what hit him." She laughed, some of her usual confidence returning. "Tyler's meeting us here for photos. Dad's already got the camera set up in the backyard." I nodded, turning to leave her to final adjustments. "Mel," she called after me. Would you play something? While we take pictures? Mom thought it might be nice to have music." The request surprised me, not because it was unreasonable, but because it represented the first time my family had actively incorporated my music into their plans rather than working around it. "I'd be happy to," I replied. "Any requests?" She shrugged, suddenly shy. "Something pretty, something that sounds like, I don't know, like everything's possible." Debussy's Clair de Lune came immediately to mind. Its ethereal quality and romantic sensibility perfect for the occasion. I nodded. "I know just the piece." An hour later, the backyard had been transformed into an impromptu photography studio. White fairy lights twinkled in the maple tree, Mom's prized roses providing a fragrant backdrop. I'd positioned the bench at the living room window, playing with the fallboard fully raised so the music could drift outside. As Tyler arrived, handsome in his tuxedo despite his obvious nervousness, I began the delicate opening notes of Debussy's masterpiece. The music provided a soundtrack for their corsage exchange, for Dad's endless photographs, for Mom's emotional adjustments to Amber's dress and hair. Through it all, I played with genuine feeling, not just technical accuracy. This wasn't a performance for competition or critical evaluation, but music as it was meant to function in human lives. Marking moments, enhancing emotions, creating memories. When Amber and Tyler prepared to depart for the actual prom, she surprised me by coming to The window. "Thank you," she whispered. It was perfect. I smiled, continuing to play as they walked to his car, her dress shimmering in the early evening light. As they drove away, I transitioned smoothly into Schumann's Träumerei, a piece whose title translates to dreaming. It seemed fitting, for the moment. Mom appeared in the doorway, dabbing at her eyes. "That was lovely, Melissa. You made her night special." "She made her own night special," I corrected gently. "I just provided background music." "No," Mom shook her head. "What you do is never just background. I'm sorry it took us so long to understand that." The simple acknowledgement meant more than any elaborate apology could have. I nodded, letting the final notes of Schumann fade into comfortable silence. Monday morning brought the first orchestral rehearsal for the Rachmaninoff Concerto. I arrived at Symphony Hall 30 minutes early, clutching my score and a travel mug of strong tea. The historic venue was quiet at this hour, just a few musicians, unpacking instruments in the wings or marking parts at their seats. I was directed to a small dressing room, a courtesy I hadn't expected as a competition winner rather than established soloist. Inside, I found a handwritten note from Maestro Lindberg. "Looking forward to our collaboration. Please join me on stage at 9:50 to discuss tempi before the full rehearsal." At the appointed time, I made my way to the main stage where the distinguished conductor was reviewing markings with the concertmaster. Alexander Lindberg cut an impressive figure even in rehearsal clothes. Tall, silver-haired, with the confident bearing of someone who had led the world's great orchestras for decades. "Ah, Ms. Chen," he greeted me warmly. "Congratulations on your Whitmore victory. Robert Abernathy speaks highly of your musicianship, which is rare enough to merit attention." I thanked him, acutely aware that this renowned conductor had discussed me with my perpetually critical professor. "Now, the Rachmaninoff," he continued briskly. "I'm particularly interested in your thoughts on the first movement's opening tempo. Many young soloists rush the bell-like chords, losing their gravitational weight. We spent the next 10 minutes discussing interpretive details, his preferences for certain transitions, my ideas about dynamic contrasts in the development section. It wasn't a negotiation exactly, but a professional exchange between collaborators, his experience balanced against my developing artistic voice. As orchestra members took their seats, Lindberg guided me to the solo position in front of the magnificent Steinway Concert Grand. "We'll begin with a straight run-through," he announced to the orchestra. "Let's hear Ms. Chen's conception before making adjustments." The rehearsal that followed was unlike any musical experience I'd had before. Playing with professional orchestra members, many of whom had decades of performance experience, created a foundation of excellence that elevated my own playing. Phrases I'd practiced hundreds of times alone or with piano accompaniment now blossomed with full orchestral color. Lindberg proved to be both demanding and supportive, stopping frequently to refine balance between sections or adjust tempi, but always with specific musical purpose rather than arbitrary authority. When the famous clarinet solo emerged in the E.I. second movement, hauntingly beautiful against the piano's gentle accompaniment, he worked meticulously with both of us to achieve perfect synchronization. "The dialogue here is intimate," he explained, like longtime friends finishing each other's sentences. By the end of the 3-hour session, we had worked through the entire concerto, identifying passages that needed further refinement and establishing a shared musical vision. As musicians packed up their instruments, several came forward to offer congratulations and encouragement. A principal violinist who praised my cadenza phrasing, an oboist who appreciated my sensitivity during our exposed duet passage. "You've prepared thoroughly," Lindberg commented as we concluded. "Refreshing in one so young. We'll focus on the third movement in tomorrow's rehearsal. I have some thoughts about the coda's accelerando that we should discuss." I returned home simultaneously, exhausted and exhilarated. The physical demands of playing a full concerto with orchestra were substantial, but the musical rewards were even greater. I practiced that afternoon with renewed purpose, incorporating Lindbergh's suggestions while maintaining the core of my interpretation. The week of rehearsals passed in a blur of focused work and musical discovery. Each session with the orchestra revealed new aspects of Rachmaninoff's masterpiece, harmonic details that emerged only in full orchestration, structural connections that became apparent through collaborative performance. Professor Abernathy attended the final rehearsal, sitting silently in the empty hall, his expression characteristically inscrutable. Afterwards, his assessment was typically concise. The second movement shows genuine maturity. The third requires more architectural awareness in the recapitulation. Coming from him, this represented high praise indeed. The evening before the EEG performance, I received an unexpected message from Alicia Michaels. "In town for your concert tomorrow. Dinner after? We'll wait backstage. Play from that place of truth we discussed. Nothing else matters." Her confidence bolstered my own as I faced the prospect of my professional orchestral debut. I slept surprisingly well that night, waking refreshed and focused rather than anxious. My parents and Amber approached the day with a combination of excitement and uncertainty, clearly wanting to support me while unsure of proper concert protocol. Dad had purchased new ties for himself and proper concert attire for all three of them, an endearing gesture that represented their desire to honor the formality of the occasion. "We'll be in Row J," Mom informed me as I prepared to leave for the pre-concert rehearsal. "Center section. The tickets you arranged are perfect." I nodded, touched that they had studied the seating chart and taken the event so seriously. "Just enjoy the music," I advised. "That's all that matters." The afternoon sound check went smoothly, final adjustments made to balance and stage positioning. Then came the quiet hours before performance, time for centered preparation and mental focus. I changed into my concert attire in the same dressing room I'd used all week, now adorned with a small vase of flowers from the orchestra's administrative staff. As showtime approached, I could hear the murmur of the audience filing into Symphony Hall, their collective energy creating a palpable atmosphere even backstage. A stage manager knocked gently, informing me that we would begin in 10 minutes. I closed my eyes, centering myself in the music I had lived with for nearly a year now. Rachmaninoff's journey from creative silence to triumphant voice. My own path from loss to resurrection. The piano that had left and returned. All these narratives converged in the music I was about to perform. When the call came, I walked on stage to warm applause, acknowledging the audience with a modest bow before taking my place at the Steinway. Maestro Lindbergh followed, the applause swelling as he mounted the podium. Our eyes met briefly before he raised his baton. In that moment of suspended possibility, I felt a perfect clarity, not the absence of nerves, but their transformation into focused energy. The famous opening chords emerged from my fingers with deliberate power, each one building upon the last to create the foundation from which the entire concerto would grow. As the orchestra entered with the melancholy first theme, I felt myself become part of something larger than my individual artistry, a collaborative musical organism bringing Rachmaninoff's vision to life. Time seemed to both expand and contract during the performance. Passages that had required careful technical attention in practice now flowed with natural momentum. Musical conversations with principal woodwinds felt like intimate dialogues, despite the concert hall setting. The cadenza, that moment of solitary expression amid orchestral context, emerged with a freedom I hadn't experienced even in rehearsal. Throughout it all, I remained aware of the hall's magnificent acoustics, carrying each note to the furthest reaches of the balcony. Not once did I search the audience for familiar faces. This wasn't about external validation, but internal truth, exactly as Alicia had reminded me. The final movement built toward its triumphant conclusion. Orchestra and piano united in Rachmaninoff's affirmation of creative resilience. As I played the last thunderous chords and Lindbergh brought the orchestra to its powerful final statement, Symphony Hall erupted in applause. I rose, acknowledging first the orchestra, then Maestro Lindbergh, before turning to the audience with a deep bow. The applause continued, growing rather than diminishing, until Lindbergh gestured for me to take a solo bow. As I did, the audience rose to their feet, a standing ovation that spread from the front rows throughout the hall. 3 curtain calls followed, each met with sustained enthusiasm. During the final one, a stagehand appeared with a bouquet of white roses, the orchestra's traditional gift to soloists. As I accepted them, I caught sight of my family in row J, all 3 standing, my mother openly crying, my father applauding with uncharacteristic abandon, Amber actually jumping up and down despite her formal attire. Backstage was a flurry of congratulations, orchestra members, administrative staff, faculty from the university. Professor Abernathy approached briefly, nodded once with quiet approval, and departed without elaborate praise. From him, this simple acknowledgement spoke volumes. As the crowd thinned, I found Alicia waiting as promised, elegant in concert black, her expression warm with professional appreciation. "You found it," she said simply. "That place where technique serves meaning rather than its own display. Rachmaninoff would have approved." I thanked her, still processing the experience that already felt dreamlike in its intensity. "Get changed," she instructed. "I've booked a table at Sorellina. You need proper food after that performance, and we have Tanglewood details to discuss." My family was waiting in the lobby, clearly uncertain about post-concert protocol, but determined to share this moment. I introduced them to Alicia, whose gracious inclusion of them in our dinner plans smoothed what might have been an awkward transition. "We've heard so much about you," Mom gushed, clearly starstruck. "Your help with Melissa's practice space was so generous." "Not generosity," Alicia corrected, just as she had with me. "Professional collegiality. Your daughter has extraordinary potential." Dad straightened slightly at this assessment from someone whose authority he recognized, if not fully understood. "We're very proud of her," he said, with none of his usual qualifications about practical considerations or realistic expectations. The late dinner that followed created its own kind of magic, my family gradually relaxing in Alicia's presence as she skillfully drew them into conversation about their own interests, while including technical discussion of the performance for my benefit. By dessert, even Amber was asking intelligent questions about Tanglewood and conservatory training. As the evening concluded, Alicia excused herself to take a phone call, giving me a private moment with my family. "I didn't understand before," Dad said quietly, "what music meant to you. I thought it was a hobby, something you enjoyed but would outgrow." He shook his head. "Watching you tonight with that orchestra, it was like seeing who you really are for the first time." "We're sorry it took something so dramatic for us to see it," Mom added, reaching for my hand across the table. "But we're here now. Whatever you need for Tanglewood, for your continued studies, we'll find a way." Amber nodded enthusiastically. "And I promise never to touch your piano again, not even to dust it." I laughed, the sound carrying no residual bitterness. "You can dust it. Just don't sell it." 4 months later, as summer transitioned to fall, an envelope arrived bearing the unmistakable logo of Carnegie Hall. Inside was an official invitation. The Young Artists International Showcase had selected me to perform Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto with the American Symphony Orchestra in their upcoming winter series. The letter cited my compelling interpretation demonstrated at the Whitmore competition and subsequent Boston Philharmonic performance, noting that Maestro Lindbergh's recommendation had been instrumental in the selection process. A handwritten note from Alicia was paperclipped to the formal invitation. "Told you this was just the beginning. Say yes immediately." I stood in our living room, the afternoon light falling across the piano that once again occupied its rightful place in our home. So much had changed since that April day when I'd discovered it missing. Not just the external circumstances of competition victories and performance opportunities, but something more fundamental in my understanding of both music and family. My parents' reaction to the Carnegie Hall invitation was everything their response to the missing piano had not been. Immediate excitement, practical offers of support, genuine pride in this milestone achievement. "We'll all be there," Dad promised, already investigating travel arrangements. "Wouldn't miss it for anything." "We should call Grandpa's friends from the VA," Mom suggested. "They'd want to know his granddaughter is playing Carnegie Hall." Amber, home from her first semester at college, immediately began planning her New York shopping itinerary around my performance date. "I need something spectacular to wear when people ask if I'm related to the soloist." I smiled, appreciating their enthusiasm while recognizing the journey we'd all taken to reach this point. The path from that empty space in our living room to Carnegie Hall had been neither direct nor easy, but its very complexity had created something valuable, a deeper understanding of what it means to have a voice worth hearing, and a family learning to listen. That evening I practiced late into the night, preparing for this next musical challenge. The house was quiet around me, my family long since asleep. But unlike those desperate dawn practice sessions after the piano was sold, this solitude felt peaceful rather than isolating, a chosen artistic communion rather than forced separation. The Rachmaninoff Concerto had become more than a competition, piece or even a signature work in my developing repertoire. It had become a personal touchstone, a musical narrative that paralleled my own experience of loss and resurrection, of silence and voice, of what it means to create beauty despite obstacles. As I played the haunting second movement, I thought of the composer whose creative voice had been silenced by criticism, who had struggled through years of self-doubt before finding his way back to musical expression. How strange and wonderful that his journey, composed into this magnificent concerto, had helped me navigate my own. The final chords faded into the quiet house. I closed the fallboard gently, resting my hands on its polished surface for a moment of gratitude. For the instrument returned, for the opportunities unfolding, for the family slowly learning a new language of support, for the music that remained mine even when its physical vessel had been temporarily taken. In 3 months, I would stand on the stage of Carnegie Hall, that legendary space where musical history has been written for generations. I would play these same notes, tell this same musical story, but with new layers of meaning acquired through each performance, each practice session, each moment of growth. The journey from that empty space in our living room to Carnegie Hall had ultimately been about finding my voice, not just as a pianist, but as a person. A voice that deserved to be heard, whether others recognized its value or not. A voice that could speak truth through music in ways words never could. Outside, the autumn wind stirred fallen leaves across our driveway. Inside, the house held the lingering resonance of Rachmaninoff's melodies, sound waves that had traveled from my fingers through strings and wood into the very walls of our home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Carnegie preparation, university, obligations, the continuing balance of artistic growth with practical realities. But tonight, in this moment of quiet completion, I felt only gratitude for the strange, painful, beautiful path that had led me here. The piano had been sold and returned, but something more valuable had been discovered in its absence and restoration. The unshakable knowledge that my music lived within me, not merely within the instrument. That understanding would sustain me through whatever challenges lay ahead, at Carnegie Hall and beyond. Some promises, once kept, opened doors to entirely new worlds of possibility. The piano's promise had been fulfilled, but mine was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.